Knave of Hearts presents Before the Tone. Episode 1. Interview Unbalanced.
Hey, you've reached Daria. I'm not at the phone right now, so leave a message after the tone and I'll get back to you when I can. Hey Daria, it's Mac. Guess I just missed you. I thought you'd said this would be a good time, but time zones are fucking weird, I guess. Well, I guess I'll just tell you about my day now, and you can listen when you get the chance. And I shall tell you in agonizing detail, because you are not here to stop me. I had a job interview today. It went pretty alright. They seem to like me anyway. You know, I've been looking for a new job since I feel like I've finally gotten over what happened at my last job at the restaurant. And what with my wanting to pay for the classes I'm taking, I just started submitting applications to all the places within walking distance. I found one opening that looked pretty promising. It was a job as a records management assistant, which is a fancy way of saying that they needed somebody good at filing and whatnot. It was a short walk away from home, and I could finally put my Bachelor's of Library Sciences to use, so I applied and sent in my stuff. That was 2 days ago? They responded pretty quickly wanting to schedule an interview. You know, this struck me as kind of strange, but I didn't really think anything of it. I just assumed that they needed somebody to fill the position quickly, or that they're a big enough company to respond quickly. Either way, I was in want of work, so I scheduled an interview. Today, I walked over to the building where my interview was to be. It's downtown, and, you know, it's a little weird. It's right by the restaurant, but I can't say I ever noticed it before. I guess that's not too strange since it's not like I make a note of all the places I walk past, but seeing it now makes it pretty hard to believe that I never noticed it before. The building is big. Not big enough to stand out too much. It's not a skyscraper, but definitely the largest building around. And it has a lot of floor-to-ceiling windows, but you can't really see in. It's like they're one-way mirrors or something. The sign out front reads Atlas Consulting in big silver letters. There's a design next to it, which I guess is their logo, but I don't know. It seems a bit too detailed to be a logo. It's a globe, which I guess is meant to allude to the Titan Atlas, but it's not right. The globe looked almost like it was crumbling in on itself, collapsing into ash. It just struck me as odd, I guess. Or interesting. I'm not sure. I suck at graphic design. I went into the lobby and was directed to where I'd wait for my interview. It was a normal building, but the rooms were a little off. This is going to sound very dumb, but the hallways seemed too long. It made me think of when my glasses prescription changed a few years ago and my depth perception was thrown off. You look down a hallway and it seems a certain length, but walking down it feels unbalanced. And there were more hallways than I expected. I guess if they're going with Greek mythology, then their architect must be Daedalus. I almost thought I would get lost on my way to the waiting area, but it didn't end up being an issue. I guess I just have a good sense of direction. I had gotten there a bit early, so I spent a decent amount of time in that waiting area. Nothing too exciting about the space itself, just normal buy-it-at IKEA office furniture and the like. There were only a couple things I noticed about it. One was that there were a lot of security cameras. That's not particularly unusual, I guess, but it was still a little unnerving. To counteract that, I made eye contact with one of the cameras to assert my dominance. Well, you'll hear how that worked out for me in a sec. But the other thing was that the waiting area was right at the end of one of those hallways. I was sitting at one end, and at the other was the door to the office of whoever I was going to interview with. So I would glance over at the door, but it felt like I couldn't really focus on it. The depth perception thing I mentioned. Maybe my depth perception is just off. This is leading me to believe that skipping my eye doctor appointment this year was not, perhaps, the wisest decision I've made. Well then. At this point, the door opened. I glanced at my watch and saw it was the exact time of my appointment. Like, to the second exact. Very punctual people all have to be on time when I work there. A woman stepped out of the office. She was tall, with long, straight hair and a gray pantsuit. She struck me as very businesslike. She greeted me and introduced herself as Eve Kakachi. She led me down the short hallway into the office. She watched me as I walked, maybe sizing me up in advance of the interview. The hallway felt longer than it was, but I tried not to react to it. In her office, we started the interview. She explained that it would be in 2 parts, a normal behavioral and a case study. Plus, there would be some follow-up discussion and questions. She began with normal, standard stuff. Tell us a bit about yourself. Where did you hear about us? That sort of thing. I won't bore you further with my canned responses to such questions. Why did you leave your last job was funny, though. I obviously left the details about the restaurant a bit vague. It's hard to make semi-accidental arson sound like a reasonable reason to leave a job without getting kicked out on the spot, after all. I said something to the effect of difficulties with some of the upper management staff. When I said that, Eve Kakachi gave me a sort of knowing grin, like she knew exactly what had happened, but was amused rather than annoyed at my attempt to cover it up. When we were talking about my past jobs, she seemed to take a keen interest in the time I spent working security at Target a couple of years ago. I didn't think much about that at the time. The next part of the interview was the case study. She explained it was meant to demonstrate my analysis skills and see how I react to problems. It's a sort of way to get inside my head and see my thought process. It was pretty interesting, so I'll get a bit into detail. She presented me with a scenario. Atlas Consulting, she said, has been hired by a storage company for security consulting. They have recently opened a new branch of their business in a location separate from their center of operations. Recently, there have been several robberies at this new branch. How do you go about solving this problem and advising them? I found this to be a pretty interesting question for a couple reasons. Firstly, this was clearly a question for someone applying as a consultant rather than a records management assistant. So, that meant that either I was mistaken about the job I applied for, or I actually should have Googled what a records management assistant was before going to my interview, or they expected crossover in the responsibilities of people with different jobs. The latter seemed the most likely. So, after a moment of thinking about it, I replied, the first thing I would need is more information. How many robberies? How regular are they? Where is this new branch located specifically? Is this something common in that location for other businesses? Who was working security at the branch at the times of the robberies? Who else was working in the building? Once I got clear answers to all of this, I would organize my information and look for patterns. If, for example, the robberies are common in that area, and it was different people working in the building each time, I'd probably recommend increasing security. Maybe they could add extra security guards or increase the number of cameras, see if that helps. If I learned that the workers were consistent at the times of the robberies, I would recommend an experiment. Switch out those workers for a period of time. If the robberies happen once a week, let's say, switch out the workers for a week. This would help isolate the factors and find the source most efficiently. This way, if any employees are involved, they will be able to be isolated as well. Additionally, since the branch is in a different location than the main center of operations, I'd also recommend installing separate cameras and camera feeds that could be monitored by the main location. An external observer keeping an eye on the happenings separate from the branch's own security. And I would not make the workers of the branch aware of this, so as to not add another complicating factor. I'd probably recommend continuing this for a period of time that is, let's say, twice as long as the intervals between robberies. Well, Daria, when I finished with that, Eve Kakachi gave me a smile. It's odd. I remember being struck by something about it. Something about her expression. But thinking about it, I can't really picture her face super clearly. But anyway, she smiled at me, and I was pretty sure I'd done a pretty solid job when she asked me a follow-up question. And if those experiments found a particular worker to be at fault, what would be your course of action? This, of course, had an obvious answer. Fire them, maybe even turn them into the police if they were stealing. But something about the way she asked made the situation feel complicated. Like I might be in a position where I were the employee at fault. Like I might not want to be too harsh on that employee. This in mind, I decided to go with a bit of a non-answer. I think it would be up to the company's individual policy. At that point, I would turn it over to them and decide internally the best course of action for everybody, I said. She gave me another smile, this one a bit mysterious. A seemingly safe decision, she replied. And so ended the case study portion of our evening. The remainder of the interview was fairly basic. We went over my educational and work background. We discussed pay rates. Their pay range is amazing, by the way. Wow. We did a few more brief hypotheticals, all that good stuff. The one other bit that was fairly interesting was when she asked if I had any questions. I blanked, and all I could think about was the building itself. So I asked her about the strange logo of the collapsing Earth. She seemed a bit surprised when I asked and let out this little laugh. I remember she replied, "Not many people notice the beauty of our logo design. The world tends to collapse under its own weight, so it relies on pillars like Atlas to hold things together." And with that, she said it was a pleasure meeting me and the interview was over. I left the office and was a little surprised that nobody new was in the waiting room. They must have been interviewing other people, I thought. Turns out, I was right. I usually am. As I was leaving, I ran into someone in the hallway. He looked lost. He told me he was there for a job interview, but he didn't really meet my eyes, and his voice sounded far away. I pointed him in the direction of the office and went on my way. Like I said, those hallways were pretty confusing, so I didn't blame him for having gotten a bit turned around. Interview over, I decided to spend some time at the library to get some of the required reading done for one of the classes I'm going to be taking. While I'm there, and this is literally hours after the interview, I get a call from none other than Atlas Consulting. They came bearing job offers. Great, right? But here's the thing. Eve Kakachi was on the line, and she offered me a job as a CCTV operator. You may take this time to note that that is neither what I applied for, nor what I interviewed for. I tried to tell her this, but she spoke over me like a train flattening pennies. She said she enjoyed talking to me, that they were impressed by my past work experience, that my case study went very well, and that they would love for me to be their new CCTV operator. Now, I was very, very confused, but before I could try again to dispute her, she said that the pay range was the same. Okay, so confused though I may have been, the fact remained that I still really needed a job, and that one was going to pay very well. And I've been a CCTV operator before. It's not bad work, so I accepted. It may have been a very strange situation, but it was still a job offer. So, yeah, I start on Monday as a CCTV operator, of all things. I'll definitely call you after my first day to give you the update. Hopefully by then you'll be able to pick up, so you can judge me to my face. Ear, I guess. Yeah, well, I have to hope about the... Hey, buddy! Fuck off! Sorry, there was some creep watching me. I'm gonna try to rush home. I might grab an Uber. I'll talk to you soon.
This episode has featured the voices of Anna Stein as Mac, Emma Johanna Puranen as Daria, and Rebecca Hansen in the credits. It was written by Anna Stein with script editing by Sarah Lillistein. Sound design and dialogue editing were done by Catherine Seaton. The theme music was composed by Doug Edwards, featuring score by Aaron Dessy. It was directed by Anna Stein. Special thanks to our Indiegogo backers, Stephen Foley, Madison Fitzgerald, and Rebecca B., and to our Monarch and Spacetime tier backers, Jacob Stein and Steven Stein, as well as to everyone who backed the campaign. For updates and ominous messaging, follow us on Twitter and Tumblr at Knave of Hearts AD. Disclaimer: the hands that hold up the sky are stronger than they appear.